Welcome to Greek for a Week. I'm glad that you have decided to view another week, another edition of Greek for a Week. This particular week, we have completed our verse by verse study of Philippians chapter 2, verses 25 through 30. And so, as a result, this week we will be looking at the entire paragraph as a whole. You'll see verses 25 then through verse 30. And we're going to diagram this particular passage to see how we might notice and recognize Paul's use of various terms and various phrases to syntactically put this particular paragraph together. So let's go ahead and look then at verse 25. He begins with, "But I considered it necessary." All right, so here's Paul basically beginning with the necessity or the urgency to do something. All right, and what is it that he wants to do? And that is to send to you, and that would be the Philippians, to send to you Epaphroditus. The pempsai is a complementary infinitive, so it's necessary to do what? It's necessary to send. And then as we continue to work through that, Paul uses several accusative words in the accusative case here to mention or to describe Epaphroditus. He is a brother, he's a co-worker, he's a fellow soldier, and he's specifically your messenger, and he's a minister of Paul's need. So this describes Epaphroditus to the Philippians. Then as he continues, he says, he considered it necessary to send Epaphroditus. You could say, why? Well, because he was longing for all of you, and the all of you again would be the Philippian church, as well as he was distressed. And he was distressed, why? Because you heard that he was sick. And of course, that there is a hati of content. That is, what is it that they heard? And they heard that he was sick. That's the content of what they heard, or the complement, if you will. And so Paul reiterates and says, indeed, he was sick to near death. So Paul's again painting the picture of just how bad it was for Epaphroditus. So you notice here I kept these kind of in parallel. You have that he was longing for all of you and he was sick. So kind of kept that parallel. So indeed, there was something about Epaphroditus. He was sick, but now there's a contrast. So though this seems to provide a negative aspect to Epaphroditus and his well-being, now we have the positive side of that well-being, and that is God had mercy on him. And not only him, but another strong contrast, but also on me. And that is obviously Paul in his reference there. Okay? You could say, for what purpose? For what purpose he was sick to near death. Ultimately, he was sick such that God had mercy on him. And you could say the result of the God's mercy then was so that I would not be sorrowful. So Paul would not be full of sorrow. That's verses 25 through 27. Now we go to the second half of this paragraph, and it's therefore, un. So I'm going to suggest here that the therefore in verse 28 is basically Paul's way of saying, okay, based upon verses 25 through 27, therefore, what have I done? I have sent him eagerly. For what purpose? So that you, Philippians, you may rejoice. So here is my subjunctive because of the hina clause. You may rejoice. And when will that rejoicing take place? Temporal participle, when you see idantes, when you see him again. And I may be less anxious. So you will rejoice, I will be less anxious. That's the purpose of sending him eagerly. Therefore, now that I'm sending him, really you could draw kind of a line here based upon verses 25 through 28. Now we're looking at therefore, okay, now I'm going to begin to transition, Paul says. Therefore, no longer am I dealing with the indicatives, but now I'm going to start to deal with the imperatives, as in, therefore, what ought you, the Philippians, to do? That is, you ought to receive. Here's our imperative. We ought to receive him in the sense in the Lord, or in a relational kind of way. He is a brother in Christ. He's related rightly related to the Lord, as we are, the Philippians, and so we are to receive him or welcome him. That's prosdechomai, the idea of welcoming. How should I do that? With meta, a manner here, with all joy. Not only should I receive him, but I should also hold those who are like him in high regard. Why? Because he was near death, as he was, or for the sake of his work of Christ. So as he was working on behalf of Christ, he was in a near-death experience. You could say, how was that the case? Well, it got a participle of means here. Well, by risking his own life. In order to, so what's the purpose for his near-death experience? For the purpose of completing what was lacking in your ministry to me. Okay, so now we're going to look at how all of that might play itself out into some kind of a message, a sermon, some kind of a maybe devotional, if you will. So verse 25, he begins to say, it's necessary that I send Epaphroditus. Why? Well, because he was longing for you, and he was also distressed. All right. And the explanation for this was that he was in a near-death experience. All right. Then he moves on and says, though that's the case, God had mercy on him. Therefore, what have I done? I have sent him so that ultimately you may rejoice. So all of this kind of fits together here. These particular verses here flow out from the necessity of sending Epaphroditus. Now we get to the commands for the Philippians. Hey, receive him, welcome him back, and hold on to those who are very much like him. Do that in high regard. Why? Because he has risked his life for you. So I think it's been interesting to see how Paul has used Timothy as an example, as well as Epaphroditus as an example, really ultimately as these two men follow on the heels of the supreme example of humility, that being Christ. In verses 5 through 11 of chapter 2, you then have these examples that follow that. So Paul has co-workers, co-laborers in Christ for the benefit of the Philippians seeing these examples. Well, next week we're going to move on to chapter 3, verse 1. So trust you have a great week, and this has been helpful for you. Until next time, see you next week.